Chapter 1. The Escape. The planet Noxen was a world caught between the past and the future, a place where industrial marvels clashed with the decay of decades-old infrastructure. It was the kind of planet that no one truly noticed unless they had to. The air was thick with the perpetual hum of machinery, its once beautiful landscapes now obscured by the constant veil of smog that hung over the cities. Great metal towers rose up like dark monoliths, spewing steam and energy into the air, powering the endless production lines that churned out the weapons and ships for the war-hardened Zarnithian Empire. Noxen's factories were the lifeblood of the Empire's war machine, and everyone here knew their place. For the people who lived in the grim, overcrowded city districts, the constant noise and pollution were merely the background of their daily existence. But tonight, in the midst of the smog-choked streets and the harsh, mechanical pulse of the city, something was happening that would shake the foundation of the Empire itself. Kira Voss, a runaway alien woman whose name had once been whispered in awe among the elite military ranks of the Zarnithian forces, was on the run. The woman who had once been revered for her combat prowess, her unwavering loyalty to the Empire, and her brilliant mind for warfare had now turned her back on all of it, choosing instead to flee the iron grip of her people. Kira, however, wasn't just any defector. She was a master tactician, a trained assassin, and above all, a warrior who had once worn the deadly armor of the Zarnithian Honor Guard, a piece of technology that made her a living weapon. It had taken Kira months to escape the clutches of the Empire, each step more treacherous than the last. The Zarnithian forces were relentless, and though they did not know her exact whereabouts, they had been hunting her across the galaxy, determined to bring her back, to silence the voice of dissent that she had become. The Empire's military might was vast, its reach stretching far beyond the known star systems, but Kira had learned to move in the shadows, using her knowledge of their tactics and strategies against them. She had evaded countless trackers, outsmarted elite soldiers, and now, with the help of a few loyal allies, she had found her way to the industrial wasteland of Noxen, a place where she believed she could finally vanish into obscurity. But nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Kira had known that her journey would not be without its dangers, and as the night deepened, the air grew heavier with tension. She was closer than she had been in months, but that meant the stakes had never been higher. Every footstep, every breath, every sound around her could spell the difference between freedom and being dragged back into the cold, unforgiving hands of the Empire. She had made a promise to herself long ago that she would never return. She would rather die on her terms than live shackled by the cruel intentions of those who sought to control her. Noxen, with its sprawling industrial landscape, seemed like the perfect place to disappear. The massive factories provided the perfect cover, and the labyrinthine alleyways of the lower city, filled with the debris of long-forgotten projects, offered ample places to hide. Kira's escape, however, had not been without its sacrifices. She had burned every bridge, severed every tie with those she once considered allies, and in doing so, she had isolated herself from everything she knew. The sense of loss was suffocating, but it was the price she had to pay to regain control of her life. Her destination was a small, forgotten district on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been abandoned by most of the Empire's officials and citizens alike. It was an area filled with the remnants of the old world, where time seemed to stand still. The buildings here were decrepit, their facades crumbling from years of neglect. The streets were filled with the remnants of a forgotten era, where machines once built by the Empire's finest engineers lay rusting in the streets, useless and forgotten. But to Kira, this was home for now. The district had no military presence, and its residents were the forgotten ones, those who had slipped through the cracks of the Empire's ever-watchful gaze. It was here that she would make her final stand, here that she would figure out her next move. For now, all she needed was rest, and the promise that she would no longer be a pawn in the Empire's deadly game. As Kira made her way through the narrow streets, her heavy boots echoing off the cracked pavement, her thoughts turned inward. She had spent years fighting for a cause she believed in, one that she had once thought was just, but now seemed nothing more than a facade. The Zarnithian Empire had promised glory, unity, and victory, but it had delivered only violence, oppression, and bloodshed. Kira had been a soldier, a protector of her people, a killer for a cause. But the truth had slowly eaten away at her. There was no honor in the Empire's wars, no righteousness in its conquest. It was a regime built on control and fear, and Kira had realized too late that she had been nothing more than a cog in its massive, unfeeling machine. She passed through the streets, ignoring the few curious eyes that followed her movements. She had learned long ago to blend in with her surroundings, to remain invisible, and it was a skill that had kept her alive. Her armor, once a symbol of her strength, now weighed heavily on her, a constant reminder of everything she had once been and everything she had left behind. The Zarnithian armor she wore was more than just protective equipment. It was an extension of herself, a piece of technology that enhanced her abilities to superhuman levels. It allowed her to move faster, hit harder, and think quicker than any of her enemies. But it also bound her to the Empire in ways that she could no longer accept. Kira stopped in the middle of the street, looking around at the dilapidated buildings. She could feel the weight of the armor pressing down on her chest, her every movement restricted by its heavy layers. It had been useful in battle, but it was also a prisonne reminder of everything she had fought for and the person she had been. The decision she made next would define her future. With a deep breath, Kira's fingers moved to the clasps that held the armor in place. Slowly, carefully, she began to disassemble the suit, piece by piece. Each plate, each lock, each fastening came undone with a soft click. The process felt cathartic, as though she were shedding not just the physical weight of the armor, but the emotional burden it had carried for so long. The armor, once so pristine and formidable, was now a heap of metal and wires at her feet, discarded like a discarded relic of a past life. Kira stood there for a moment, looking at the pile, a strange sense of freedom washing over her. For the first time in years, she felt lighter both physically and emotionally. The suit that had once made her a weapon, a tool of destruction, was now nothing more than a hollow shell. She felt exposed without it, vulnerable in a way she hadn't in a long time. But it was the price she had to pay to be truly free. She turned, ready to continue on her journey, but before she could take another step, she heard a voice behind her. "Will my armor stop us?" the voice asked, tinged with urgency. Kira froze. The voice was familiar, almost too familiar. She spun around, her heart racing, to find a young woman standing in the shadows. She was tall, with pale green skin and eyes that shimmered like liquid silver. Her features were sharp, her expression unreadable. "I'll remove it," the woman said, her voice a mix of defiance and desperation. "Just don't let them catch us. Please." Kira's breath caught in her throat. The woman was another runaway, another soul seeking freedom from the Empire's oppressive reach. Kira could see the desperation in her eyes, the same fire that had once burned in her own. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two women caught in the web of the Empire's cruelty. Kira nodded, understanding what was at stake. "Let's go. We don't have much time." The two women turned and fled together into the night, the echoes of their footsteps lost in the hollow hum of the dying city. Kira and the strange woman, who had spoken those urgent words, moved swiftly through the deserted streets, their footsteps muffled by the dense fog that hung in the air. The quiet was almost suffocating, the kind of silence that felt wrong in a city meant to churn with industry and life. The dim glow of distant streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the broken roads. But neither woman stopped to take a breath or look back. There was no time for hesitation. Every second, every corner turned could be the difference between freedom and recapture. The young alien woman, who had yet to introduce herself, was tall, with sharp features and a sense of urgency that mirrored Kira's own. Her clothes were simple, a mix of ragged cloth and makeshift armor enough to protect, but not enough to hold against the Zarnithian elite forces that would surely be closing in on them. Kira could tell she was running from something far worse than just the law. There was a fear in her eyes, an unfamiliar terror that seemed to seep from her every movement. The woman's skin, though pale, shimmered faintly under the dim lights, giving her an ethereal quality that contrasted with the grim surroundings. Kira didn't ask who she was or why she had found her in this crumbling city. There were more pressing concerns. Kira had been running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have an ally, let alone someone so vulnerable and in need of protection. It was almost ironic Kira had spent years protecting others, fighting for an empire that no longer deserved her loyalty, and now she found herself guiding someone else, taking on the mantle of protector once again. The streets seemed to stretch on forever as they navigated their way through dark alleyways, evading the watchful eyes of the Zarnithian patrols that regularly swept through the city. Kira knew these parts of Noxen well. She had been trained in evasion, taught to anticipate the movements of the enemy, to blend in with the shadows when necessary. Yet, even she knew that the longer they stayed here, the more likely it was that they would be caught. Her armor may have been discarded, but her skills were still razor-sharp, and the woman's presence, this unknown entity with no name, no history, was a weight Kira wasn't prepared for. "We need to move faster," Kira whispered, her voice low and filled with urgency. "The patrols are never far behind. They'll be looking for both of us." The woman nodded silently, her pace quickening as she glanced around them nervously. They rounded another corner, and Kira's senses went on high alert. The sound of distant footsteps echoed, and she could almost feel the pulse of the Empire's relentless search closing in. Kira's hand reached instinctively for the empty sheath at her side, the place where her weapon used to be, where the sleek energy blade had once rested, a tool of both power and comfort. But it was gone now, left behind when she shed the armor that had kept her tethered to the Empire. She would have to rely on the skills she had honed over years of battle. There would be no more high-tech gadgets, no more advanced weapons to turn the tide. The only thing Kira had now was her mind and her reflexes, and the hope that, perhaps, she could make a difference for someone else this time. The woman's voice broke the silence. "Will my armor stop us?" she asked, her tone tinged with uncertainty and fear. The question was jarring, both for its abruptness and the realization that it wasn't just the armor Kira had discarded. The woman was still clad in her own form of protection, her armor much more rudimentary but still capable of offering some level of defense. It was a question that hung in the air, a symbol of the fear they both felt, the fear of being exposed, of being vulnerable in a world that demanded strength above all else. Kira stopped abruptly, turning to face the woman. "What armor?" she asked quietly, though her eyes betrayed the worry she felt. She hadn't noticed before, but the woman's armor was more than just a physical shell, it was a prison, much like her own. The woman hesitated, her face shadowed, and then with a defiant breath, she reached for the clasps at her sides. With a practiced motion, she began to disassemble her armor, removing it piece by piece. The clinking of the metal plates against the pavement echoed loudly in the quiet night, an almost sacrificial act that felt heavy in the air. She wasn't just shedding protection. She was shedding the very thing that had kept her alive up until now. Kira watched in silence, understanding the significance of the act. The woman looked at Kira, her expression conflicted. "It's not stopping us," she said, her voice filled with resolve and vulnerability. "I can't run with it. Not anymore." Kira nodded slowly, understanding all too well. She had made the same decision only hours ago, when she had removed her own armor. It had been a symbol of everything she had once fought for. The weight of it had been both a privilege and a curse. But now, without it, she was freer than she had ever been. The woman, however, still clung to the pieces of her armor as though it might protect her from something she couldn't escape. "We need to go," Kira said urgently, urging the woman to hurry. "We can't afford to stand still." The woman gave one last look at the discarded pieces of her armor before turning back to Kira, determination flickering in her eyes. Together, they moved on, their path uncertain but driven by the shared goal of survival. Kira felt a strange sense of solidarity with this woman, a fleeting connection forged by circumstance. They were both running from the past, from the Empire, from the lives they had once known, but now they were bound together by something greater than fear. As they ran deeper into the night, the distant sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, and Kira knew their time was running out. They had to make it to the safe house on the edge of the city, a place that she had prepared for such an occasion. It was a hidden location, far from the watchful eyes of the Empire, and she had stocked it with supplies, weapons, and an escape route to a neighboring planet. They had to reach it, or everything they had fought for so far would be in vain. They rounded another corner, slipping into an alleyway where the shadows swallowed them whole. Kira's heart raced as she glanced over her shoulder, watching for any sign of the approaching patrols. They couldn't afford to be seen. Not now. Not when they were so close. Suddenly, a voice cut through the night, harsh and grating. "There they are. Stop them." Kira's blood ran cold. The Empire's soldiers had found them. Without hesitation, she grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her deeper into the alley. "Run," she hissed. "Go. Now." The woman, though still unarmed, didn't hesitate. She sprinted ahead, her breathing shallow, her footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Kira followed, her mind racing as she assessed their options. They were being cornered from all sides, and the patrols were closing in fast. There was no way they could fight their way out of this. They would need to think fast, move fast. Kira's mind began to spin, running through options, planning their next move in real time. They had only one chance to make it out alive. Chapter 2. The Ties That Bind. As Kira and the woman dashed through the alleyways, their surroundings becoming increasingly claustrophobic, Kira's mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. She had been here before, trapped, cornered, with only her instincts to guide her. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't running alone. She had someone to protect. Someone who, despite the fear and vulnerability in her eyes, had a fire in her that Kira recognized. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the distant sound of the approaching patrols growing louder until they reached a narrow cul-de-sac. The dead end was as sudden as it was final. There was nowhere left to run, and Kira's breath hitched as she looked around, assessing their options. The woman's face was a mirror of her own determination, a mixture of desperation and courage that set Kira's resolve alight. "We're trapped," the woman said, her voice shaky but resolute. Kira glanced around, and her eyes landed on a nearby maintenance access hatch. The metal door was rusted, old, but it could be their way out. They had no choice. "Get to that hatch," Kira said urgently. "We don't have much time." Together, they bolted for the access hatch, their steps thunderous in the still night. Kira reached the door first, prying it open with all her strength. As the woman arrived beside her, they both squeezed through the narrow opening, the sounds of pursuit now just behind them. The darkness inside was absolute, but it didn't matter. They had just bought themselves precious seconds. Seconds that could mean the difference between freedom and capture. Inside the maintenance tunnels, Kira could feel her pulse racing. She didn't know if they were still being pursued, but every instinct told her they weren't safe yet. They had to keep moving. And so they did, through the labyrinth of tunnels, down into the underground levels of Noxen, toward the one place that could offer them refuge, the safe house. The safe house was just beyond the next level, a hidden bunker used by rebels and defectors, a place that few knew about and even fewer could access. Kira had trusted it with her life before, and now it was their only hope. The tunnels beneath Noxen were a maze of cold concrete, dimly lit by the occasional flickering overhead light, casting long shadows across the walls. Kira led the way, her mind focused entirely on keeping her footsteps light and her breathing steady. The woman, still struggling to adjust to the weight of the escape, followed close behind, her steps slightly erratic as she tried to match Kira's pace. The sound of their movement reverberated off the stone, echoing down the narrow corridors. It was unnerving, the silence between their hurried breaths filling the space with a tension that was palpable. Kira didn't dare look back. She could feel the pressure building, a suffocating sense of time running out. The Empire was relentless in its pursuit of defectors like herself, and while she had evaded them for months, she knew it would only be a matter of time before they cornered her again. Her heart pounded against her chest, but it wasn't just the fear of capture that fueled her. It was the woman, her new ally. Kira didn't know who she was, or why she had found her, but in that moment, the woman wasn't just another fugitive. She was a symbol of everything Kira had once fought for. Freedom, autonomy, the belief that no one should be enslaved by the system that had shaped their lives. She wasn't running away for herself. She was running for both of them, to ensure that the Empire's grip would never reclaim them. The woman had proven herself in those brief moments of action. The decision to remove her armor, the very thing that symbolized her power and protection, was one of the bravest acts Kira had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a rejection of the armor's physical weight, it was a rejection of everything it represented. The fear in the woman's eyes had been replaced with a spark of determination, a quiet defiance that mirrored Kira's own struggle. They reached a narrow ladder leading down into a deeper section of the underground tunnels. Kira gripped the rusted iron rungs, her muscles straining with the effort to maintain speed. The woman was still with her, though she had begun to slow. Kira caught her eye for a fleeting moment before they both descended into the shadows below. She could hear the faint sound of something skittering in the distance, the echoes of the Empire's relentless presence. They couldn't stop. Not for a moment. Not until they reached the safe house. The deeper they went into the tunnels, the colder it became. The air was damp, and the walls were coated with a slick residue that Kira couldn't identify. Yet there was an eerie comfort in the darkness. No cameras, no guards, no Empire. Just the two of them, moving through the hidden arteries of Noxen's underbelly. It was a strange form of liberation, knowing that they were getting closer to safety. Yet even as she pushed forward, Kira felt a tightening in her chest, an undeniable weight. She wasn't used to having to protect someone. She had lived her life as a weapon, relying on her own strength to survive. Now, with the woman beside her, that burden had shifted. She had to ensure that they both made it out alive. She had to fight for this new future, even if it meant giving up everything she had once believed in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity in the cold, silent corridors, they reached the entrance to the safe house. It was nothing more than a small hatch, tucked behind an old ventilation system, one that Kira had memorized during her time living among the underground rebels. She reached out, her fingers brushing the hidden switch that would reveal the door. The moment the hatch creaked open, a sense of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. She could still feel the chase, the pursuit at her back, pushing her forward. Kira stepped inside first, motioning for the woman to follow. The safe house was as unremarkable as any other hidden base of operations, small, cramped, and filled with the scent of old technology and stale air. But to Kira, it was everything. It was security. It was freedom. She hadn't been here in months, but it was still the same. The walls were lined with crates of supplies, and the faint hum of a generator in the corner offered some semblance of comfort. "Stay low," Kira whispered, moving quickly to the control panel. The woman nodded, her eyes scanning the room nervously, as if expecting the walls to close in around them. Kira moved with purpose, punching in a series of codes on the panel. As the door clicked shut behind them, Kira released a long, steady breath. The woman, her face still tense with anxiety, finally spoke. "Who are you?" Her voice was shaky but curious, almost hesitant to ask. Kira paused, looking at the woman for the first time as if truly seeing her. Her long silver eyes, sharp yet full of mystery, seemed to search Kira for answers. The expression on her face was one of silent desperation. Kira thought about the question for a moment before answering. "I was once a soldier," Kira began, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I fought for the Empire. I believed in it, once. I wore the armor and served their will. But I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't live under their rule any longer." The woman seemed to understand, nodding in silence as she took a seat against one of the crates. The safe house was quiet now, with only the low hum of equipment filling the air. For the first time since their escape, Kira allowed herself a moment to relax. They were safe for now. "And you?" Kira asked, her gaze softening. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, a flicker of pain crossing her face. Her hands were trembling slightly, her fingers curled tightly into fists. "I was a prisoner," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. "Captured by the Empire, but I escaped. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I heard rumors of rebels, of people like you, people who were trying to fight back. I just wanted to be free." Kira saw the weight in her words. The woman had been through something Kira could only imagine, something far darker than her own experiences. The Empire was ruthless, and it had taken everything from this woman: her freedom, her identity, her place in the world. Now, she was nothing but a refugee, lost and hunted. "You're not alone anymore," Kira said softly, her voice carrying a reassurance that she hadn't felt for herself in years. "We fight together now, and we will win this." The woman's eyes met hers, a flicker of hope igniting behind the fear. "Do you think we can?" Kira took a deep breath, standing tall as she glanced around the small room. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we have a chance now. That's more than we had before." Chapter 3. Unraveling the Past. The hours in the safe house passed quickly as Kira and the woman whose name was now revealed to be Lyra worked together to plan their next steps. Kira knew that the safe house would not stay secret for long. The Empire had a way of sniffing out rebels, traitors, and fugitives. They would come for them soon enough. But for now, they had time, and time was a rare luxury. The two women spent the next few hours gathering supplies, rations, weapons, medical kits, and anything else that might aid in their escape from Noxen. As they worked, Kira's thoughts began to wander, and for the first time since her escape, she allowed herself to think about the larger picture. What did it all mean? What had led her to this point, to this strange, unexpected alliance with Lyra? Kira had known, deep down, that her life would never be the same once she walked away from the Empire. But it wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about understanding what she had been fighting for all along. The Empire had always promised glory and justice, but what had it delivered? Nothing but suffering and conquest. She had been part of the machine, a tool of a greater power that only sought to consume and destroy. Lyra had been part of that machine, too, once. Now, both women stood on the precipice of something larger than themselves. As the sun rose over the distant horizon, casting the faintest light into the small room, Kira turned to Lyra. "We need to find out more," she said, a determination in her voice. "There's something bigger going on. Something the Empire doesn't want us to know." Lyra looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "The Empire has been hiding something," Kira continued. "Something dangerous. And I think we can expose it. Together." The faint light from the early morning sun filtered through the narrow slit in the wall, casting a pale glow over the safe house's small, cramped interior. The two women sat among the supplies they had gathered, the scattered crates and medical kits marking their efforts to prepare for what was coming next. The quiet hum of the generator in the corner was the only sound, a reminder of their fragile respite in the heart of a city that was anything but peaceful. But Kira's mind was a far cry from peaceful as she stared at Lyra, whose wide eyes now reflected the seriousness of their conversation. "What do you mean, something bigger?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't understand. What could the Empire be hiding, especially if they're hunting down defectors like us?" Kira stood, moving to the corner of the room where a dusty data terminal lay. She wiped away the grime that had settled on its surface, feeling the weight of the years of resistance, of secrets buried by the very forces they were trying to escape. As she powered up the terminal, the quiet beep of the system coming to life was a strange comfort. It was the only connection they had to the outside world, only way they could access the information that might just give them an edge over the Empire that had hunted them for so long. "Before I left the Empire," Kira began slowly, her fingers hovering over the data terminal, "I was assigned to a special unit one that handled covert operations. My role was to infiltrate rebellious groups, extract information, and eliminate the threats to the Empire's reign. I wasn't always the soldier I am now, but during my time in those operations, I learned something. I overheard something. There's a project, something hidden deep within the Empire's archives. It's classified at the highest level, and no one outside of the highest echelons of power knows about it." Kira's voice softened, filled with a sense of disbelief that had haunted her for months. "I think they're building a weapon that could destroy entire star systems." Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "A weapon that powerful? But how could they possibly?" Kira didn't let her finish the question. She had her own suspicions, but she wasn't ready to voice them yet. There were too many unanswered questions, too many fragments that needed to be connected. "I don't know," she said, her voice hardening with determination, "but I've seen the signs. I've heard enough to know that they're planning something catastrophic, and we can't let it succeed. We have to find out what this project is, and we have to stop it before it's too late." Lyra's face was pale, the weight of Kira's words sinking in. "But how do we even begin to look for something like that? The Empire's archives are impenetrable. How can we get to it without being caught?" Kira turned away from the terminal, her mind racing with possibilities. "I have an old contact," she said, her voice laced with a flicker of hope. "Someone who can help us get access to the Empire's classified systems. He owes me a favor, but it won't be easy. He's deep within the Empire's bureaucracy, and it's risky reaching out to him now. If we're caught trying to make contact, it could blow everything." She paused, looking back at Lyra. "But if we want to uncover the truth, it's our best shot." Lyra swallowed hard, clearly still processing everything Kira had told her. "You're asking me to trust you, to risk everything on a contact you've barely mentioned." How do I know he can be trusted? How do I know this isn't some trap the Empire set for us? Kira knew the question was coming. She knew that trust was a fragile thing, especially after everything they had both been through. But there was no room for hesitation now. If she was to bring Lyra along in this, she had to be honest, as much as she could. He's one of the few people I trust in the Empire, Kira said, her voice low but steady. He's helped me before, and he's one of the few who's seen the cracks in the system. He wants to help, but he's afraid. Afraid of what the Empire might do to him if they find out he's been helping people like me. But I know he'll do it. He's got no reason to betray us. The Empire is too corrupt, even for him. Lyra nodded, her expression still uncertain. I'll follow your lead, Kira, but I need to know what's next. How do we contact him? What do we do if it goes wrong? Kira set her jaw, resolve hardening within her. We'll take it step by step. First, I'll reach out to him. If we get access to the information we need, we move forward. If it doesn't work out, we'll have to go underground again. But I won't stop until I know what the Empire is hiding, and I won't let them use that weapon against anyone else. Lyra stood, her body tense, but with a newfound strength in her posture. Then let's get to work. Kira nodded, stepping back from the terminal, her mind already spinning with the next phase of their plan. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and obstacles they couldn't even predict. But it was the only path they had, and there was no turning back now. They would uncover the Empire's secrets, even if it meant risking everything to do so. Chapter 4. The Awakening. Kira's fingers flew over the data terminal, working quickly to initiate the encrypted communication link to her contact. She could feel the tension building in the air, the weight of their decisions pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking a stand, about revealing the Empire's dark secrets and putting an end to the horrors they had unleashed on the galaxy. For the first time in months, Kira felt the stirrings of hope deep within her chest, but it was tempered by a cold reality. They were walking a razor-thin line, and one misstep could be their last. As she sent the encrypted message, she glanced over at Lyra, who was pacing nervously in the corner of the safe house. Lyra had been quiet since their discussion, the weight of everything they had just learned still settling in her mind. It was clear that the enormity of what they were trying to do was hitting her now, but there was no turning back. They were committed to this cause, and Kira wouldn't let them fail. "Do you think he'll respond?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kira didn't immediately answer. Instead, she focused on the terminal, watching the progress bar as the message encrypted and sent itself to the hidden communication channel. She had no way of knowing how long it would take for her contact to respond. It could be hours, or it could be days. She had done this before, but it had always been a calculated risk. This time, the stakes were higher. Far higher. "I don't know," Kira replied, her voice steady but strained. He might not even respond at all. He could be in too deep with the Empire, or he could have already been compromised. But we have to try. The silence between them stretched on, both women lost in their own thoughts as they waited. Kira could hear her heartbeat in the quiet of the room, the sound a constant reminder of the stakes. Everything depended on this. If they couldn't find the answers they needed, if they couldn't gain access to the Empire's secrets, then all of their efforts, all of their sacrifices, would be for nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the terminal beeped. Kira's breath caught in her throat as the screen flickered to life, displaying a simple message. "I can help. Meet me at Sector 9, Grid Alpha. Midnight. Be ready." Kira's heart skipped a beat. It was a response. The contact was alive, and he was willing to meet. They were one step closer to the truth. Lyra looked at Kira, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He's agreed? Just like that?" Kira nodded, her mind already racing. "This is just the beginning. We'll meet him, get the information, and then we'll figure out how to expose the Empire for what it really is." She stood, her body filled with renewed determination. "We move quickly. We can't afford to waste any time." Lyra followed suit, her expression serious now. "So, we go to Sector 9? What do we do once we're there?" Kira turned to her, her gaze unwavering. "Once we get the intel, we act. If the Empire has what I think they have, we can't waste a second. But we need to be ready for anything. This could be a trap." "We'll be ready," Lyra said firmly, her voice full of resolve. Kira gave her a quick, reassuring smile, then turned to gather her things. The road ahead was perilous, but Kira had made her choice. There was no turning back now. Together, they would uncover the Empire's darkest secrets, even if it meant taking down the very system that had once shaped their lives. The battle for the galaxy was about to change, and Kira Voss wasn't going to stop until she had exposed the truth. Kira quickly packed the essentials into her bag, everything they might need for the mission ahead. Weapons, a few rations, the portable data devices that could allow them to gather more intel if they managed to breach the Empire's secure systems. As she moved through the cluttered safehouse, her mind was already mapping out the path to Sector 9. She knew the city like the back of her hand, but this would be different. Every shadow felt deeper now, every corner more dangerous. The Empire's forces could be anywhere, waiting for a sign that the fugitive they had been hunting was no longer hiding. Lyra, her face grim but determined, packed quickly beside her. Kira glanced at the young woman, wondering about the past that had led her here, wondering what battles she had fought, what demons she was running from. But there was no time for that now. They both had to focus. They had no idea what they were walking into, but Kira had made a promise to herself this would be the end of it. The Empire's hold on the galaxy had gone on for too long, and she would do everything in her power to tear it down. "We need to stick to the outskirts," Kira said, her voice low but steady. "We'll avoid the main streets. It's the fastest way, but it's also the most dangerous." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused as she double-checked her gear. "I'm ready," she replied, her tone just as serious as Kira's. "Let's end this." They moved out of the safe house under the cover of darkness, slipping through the winding streets of Noxen, using the familiar alleyways and hidden passages to avoid detection. Kira led the way, her senses on high alert. Every footstep felt like it echoed across the city, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the Empire's soldiers were only a few steps behind. The safe house had been their sanctuary for the moment, but they both knew it wasn't sustainable. The Empire would come for them soon enough. Sector 9, Grid Alpha, was located on the outskirts of the city, a district once used for industrial purposes but now mostly abandoned. Kira knew that the area was filled with old, decrepit structures, darkened by time and neglect. It was a perfect place for a covert meeting, but also the perfect place for an ambush. Every instinct in Kira screamed that this was a trap, that this was all too easy, but she couldn't afford to second-guess herself. As they reached the outer edge of Sector 9, Kira paused, signaling for Lyra to halt. They crouched low behind an abandoned structure, the shadows of the surrounding ruins providing them with the cover they needed. Kira scanned the area with precision, noting the layout of the sector, the entry points, the possible escape routes. A soft crackle in her earpiece broke the silence. It was a message, brief and to the point. "I'm here. Don't trust anyone." Kira's pulse quickened. The warning was clear, but it wasn't enough. She turned to Lyra, her expression unreadable. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." The two of them moved silently, slipping deeper into the sector, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The eerie silence of the place felt unnatural, as if something was waiting. Every instinct Kira had honed in years of battle told her something was wrong, but she couldn't afford to back down now. The meeting point was near a dilapidated building at the edge of Sector 9, half collapsed but still standing. The door creaked open just enough for them to slip inside. The room was empty, dark, and filled with the smell of decay. It was exactly as Kira had expected, but the emptiness unsettled her. She wasn't sure who or what was waiting for them, but she had come this far. Kira and Lyra stepped into the center of the room, their eyes darting around, expecting the worst. Kira raised her hand to signal Lyra to remain quiet, her body tense with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, the final step of a long and dangerous journey. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. Kira's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar silhouette, her old contact, the man she had once trusted. His face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, but there was no mistaking him. His name was Larkin. He had been a high-ranking officer in the Empire's covert operations, the kind of person who had the resources to gather information from within the system. "You're late," Larkin said, his voice sharp but weary. He stepped closer, eyes flicking over Kira and Lyra, sizing them up. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." Kira's guard remained up. "You better have something useful," she snapped. "This better not be a trap." Larkin's eyes flickered to the shadows, a subtle glance that suggested more than he was willing to say. The Empire knows you're here. They've been tracking your every move since you left the military. They know exactly where you're headed next. Kira clenched her fists, her body going taut with anger. What do you mean they know? How dash? Before she could finish her question, a sudden noise interrupted them. The sound of footsteps, quick and deliberate, filled the room. Kira's blood ran cold. She reached for her sidearm, but before she could pull it, a light from above flickered on, blinding her for a moment. The door behind them slammed shut with a resounding thud. And then, they were surrounded. The figures that stepped into the room were not Empire soldiers. They were something worse. Tall, clad in sleek black armor, their eyes glowing an unnatural red. Their presence filled the room with an unsettling coldness. Kira's heart sank. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were something else, something engineered for a purpose far darker than she had ever imagined. Larkin stepped back, his expression one of grim resignation. I'm sorry, Kira. I tried to warn you. The project hits more than you know. And now it's too late. Kira's pulse hammered in her ears. The Empire wasn't just hiding a weapon. It had created something far more dangerous. Something capable of not just destroying entire systems, but of controlling the very fabric of existence. The lights dimmed as the figures stepped closer, their weapons ready. Kira could feel the weight of the truth crashing down around her. The Empire had built a force more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. And now, it was here, staring her down. The question no longer remained whether they would escape or not. It was whether they would survive long enough to stop the horrors that the Empire had unleashed. The time for answers was over. Now, it was a fight for the future of the galaxy. Kira turned to Lyra, her voice a whisper. We need to stop them. We need to end this now, before it's too late. As the figures closed in, Kira and Lyra drew their weapons, ready for the battle that would define the galaxy's future. The final act of resistance had begun. The end of the Empire was only a matter of time, and nothing, not even these terrifying new enemies, would stop them. As the first shot was fired, Kira knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same again.